The crystalline call echoed through the void, a melody that could bend steel and shatter resolve. Ship after ship had followed it to their doom, drawn by the irresistible pull of the void siren of Malaraxa. Some said her voice was a biological weapon designed by the last great empire before the collapse. Others claimed she was the evolved descendant of deep space leviathans that fed on starlight and cosmic radiation. No one knew for certain, and those who ventured close enough to find out never returned to tell the tale. No one except Kadros Vel. "You're a damned fool, Vel," Commander Nixari spat, her scaled face contorted with frustration. "That's a Class 9 restricted zone. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out." Kadros leaned against the viewport of the intrepid Dawn, watching the swirling nebula where the siren was said to dwell. His weathered human face, lined with scars from 100 worlds, remained impassive. 53 ships in the last decade, he said quietly. Thousands of lives lost. The Galactic Accord has given up on recovery missions. Because they're suicide missions. Nixari slammed her fist on the console. Even for a human, your species' famous resilience won't save you from whatever waits in that nebula. Kadros smiled thinly. The Accord isn't paying me to rescue ships, Commander. They're paying me to kill the siren. The room fell silent. Even the ship's systems seemed to quiet at his words. "Impossible," whispered Etrick, the ship's xenobiologist. His translucent tentacles trembled as he spoke. "The siren entity has survived for centuries. Weapons systems malfunction within her sphere of influence. No hunter has ever—" "I'm not going to use weapons," Kadros interrupted, turning to face the crew. "I'm going to use this." He tapped his temple with a finger. Nixari's laugh was harsh. "Your brain? The same organ her song supposedly overwhelms first?" Kadros removed a small device from his pocket. "Professor Landvik's team at the Helios Institute developed this neural dampener. It should protect me long enough to reach her." "Should?" Etrick's voice rose an octave. "The science is solid," Kadros replied, though his confidence didn't quite reach his eyes. "But more importantly, I've got something the others didn't." "And what's that?" Nixari asked. "I can hear her already." Kadros turned back to the viewport, his gaze distant. "Even through the shielding, even with the dampener prototype, she's singing to me." The revelation sent a chill through the command deck. "That's not possible," Etrick stammered. "Her range is limited to 3 parsecs, I know." Kadros pressed his palm against the cold transparasteel. "But I've been hearing her since we entered this sector. It's faint, but it's there." "Then you're already compromised," Nixari declared. "Mission aborted. We're returning to—" "No." Kadros's voice was steel. "This is exactly why it has to be me. I can track her. I can find her." "And what then?" demanded Nixari. "What's your brilliant plan once you're face to face with the creature that's destroyed battlecruisers?" Kadros's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm going to talk to her." The dropship bay was silent as Kadros checked his gear one final time. The environmental suit was top of the line, designed to withstand the caustic elements in the nebula. The neural dampener hugged the base of his skull, its gentle hum a counterpoint to the distant melody that had become his constant companion. "Yars, survival pod has enough oxygen for 72 hours, Etrick explained, nervously adjusting settings. "After that, I won't need 72 hours, Kadros replied, one way or another. Commander Nixari approached, her expression grim. "The Accord wants the siren neutralized, not martyrs. Remember your training, Vel?" Kadros nodded once before sealing his helmet. As the airlock cycled, he felt the song growing clearer, more insistent. Beautiful beyond words. "Come to me," it seemed to say. "I've been waiting for you." And for the first time in his life, Kadros Vel wasn't running toward danger. He was answering a call. The survival pod cut through the nebula's outer layers like a blade through silk, trailing iridescent particles in its wake. The navigation systems flickered and died within minutes, just as predicted. Kadros switched to manual controls, guided by the song that grew stronger with each passing moment. Inside, his helmet, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate controls. The neural dampener at the base of his skull pulsed rhythmically, fighting against the siren's influence. It wasn't pain he felt. It was yearning, a desperate need to reach the source of that otherworldly melody. "Diagnostic check," he murmured, into his comm, knowing the intrepid Dawn could no longer receive his transmissions this deep in the nebula. Speaking aloud helped maintain focus. Oxygen levels stable, hull integrity at 92%, neural dampener functioning at 68% efficiency. That last number troubled him. Professor Landvik had warned that anything below 70% meant the dampener was losing the battle against the siren's call. Kadros increased the power, feeling the device grow warm against his skin. The nebula thickened around him, swirling masses of purple and blue gas illuminated by distant stars. Beautiful, deadly, and unlike anything in charted space. The scientists called it the Malaraxa anomaly, a region where the laws of physics seem to bend and warp unpredictably. A sudden impact rocked the pod, sending Kadros lurching against his restraints. Through the viewport, he glimpsed the twisted wreckage of a ship, one of the siren's victims. Then another appeared and another, a graveyard of vessels suspended in the cosmic dust, some ancient and corroded, others eerily pristine. "Gods," he whispered, maneuvering between the derelicts. Some bore the markings of military vessels, others were civilian transports. One massive hulk was clearly Kulathian in design, shocking, considering the Kulath hadn't traveled beyond their home system in 15 millennia. The neural dampener's efficiency dropped to 61%. The song swelled in his mind, no longer just melody but images now. A crystalline form hovering in darkness, tentacles of light extending outward, reaching for him. Beckoning. Closer, the images seemed to say. Come closer. Kadros gritted his teeth and diverted more power to the dampener. "Not yet," he muttered. "Not on your terms." His pod drifted past a relatively intact ship, its hull marked with Accord insignia. The Wayfarer, lost just 3 months ago with all hands. Kadros activated his external scanners, searching for signs of life, though he expected none. The scanner picked up a single energy signature, faint but unmistakable. Something was moving inside the derelict vessel. Training and curiosity warred, with his mission parameters. The siren was his target, not potential survivors. But if someone had survived this long in the nebula— "Adjust course," he told the pod's semi-functional computer. "Docking procedure with nearest vessel." The pod's thrusters sputtered as they aligned with the Wayfarer's auxiliary airlock. Magnetic clamps engaged with a dull thunk that resonated through the hull. Kadros double-checked his sidearm, a simple projectile weapon less likely to malfunction in the anomaly than energy-based alternatives, and prepared for EVA. Neural dampener at 57% efficiency, he noted grimly. Enough for a quick reconnaissance. The airlock cycled open, and Kadros pushed off into the derelict ship. Emergency lighting cast long shadows through the corridors. The artificial gravity was offline, leaving debris floating eerily in the stale air. His suit detected adequate oxygen levels. Life support was somehow still functioning despite the vessel's condition. Following the energy signal, Kadros made his way to the ship's bridge. The doors were sealed, but a manual override granted him access. What he found inside stopped him cold. 7 crew members floated motionless at their stations, perfectly preserved. Their eyes were open, expressions serene, as if they'd simply stopped living mid-breath. No signs of trauma, no indication of struggle, and in the center of the bridge, hovering before the captain's chair, was a pulsing crystalline shard, no larger than Kadros's fist. It emitted a soft blue light that seemed to dance in time with the song in his head. A fragment, Kadros realized aloud. Not the siren herself, but a piece of her. As if responding to his voice, the crystal's light intensified. The song in his mind crescendoed, and the neural dampener gave a warning beep as its efficiency plummeted to 43%. Kadros reached for the crystal, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't resist. His training screamed warnings, but his hand moved of its own accord, fingers extending toward the mesmerizing light. At the last moment, he diverted his reach, grabbing instead for the captain's log crystal in the chair's armrest. The sirens. Fragment pulsed angrily, its song becoming discordant in Kadros's mind. Not today, he grunted, securing the log crystal in his suit's pouch. The fragment began to move, rising higher, its light becoming painfully bright. Kadros didn't wait to see what would happen next. He pushed off from the chair, propelling himself back toward the airlock, pursued by the increasingly frantic melody that clawed at the edges of his consciousness. Neural dampener at 38% efficiency, his suit system warned. Critical failure, imminent. He needed to reach his pod before the dampener failed completely, before he became another perfectly preserved corpse in this floating tomb, before he surrendered to the call that, even now, felt more like coming home than any planet he'd ever known. The pod's engines strained against the nebula's strange currents as Kadros pushed deeper into the anomaly. Behind him, the Wayfarer had begun to glow with an inner light that spread from section to section, the siren's fragment awakening the dead ship. He didn't look back, couldn't afford to. Neural dampener at 32% efficiency. The warning flashed across his helmet display, but Kadros barely registered it. The captain's log crystal from the Wayfarer sat in his analyzer, slowly revealing its secrets. Most of the data was corrupted, but fragments remained intact. The final entries of Captain Morvay Elson. Day 47 in the anomaly, the captain's voice crackled through the pod's speakers. The entity continues to communicate, not just song now, but images, feelings. The crew reports shared dreams. I believe it's trying to understand us. Static interrupted the recording before continuing. Day 53, rethinking everything. The siren isn't killing ships, it's collecting them, studying them. We're specimens in a cosmic laboratory. Priaj thinks the entity is ancient, predating spaceflight entirely. It doesn't understand that we need food, water, that we die. It's preserving us like insects in amber. Kadros frowned at the implications. If the siren wasn't malevolent but merely curious, perhaps there was another solution beyond neutralization. But the loss of life remained the same regardless of intention. The next log entry came through clearer. Day 60. I can see it now, the center of its consciousness. A crystalline structure larger than our ship, pulsating with intelligence. It's beautiful. I understand why we couldn't resist its call. But we're dying now, one by one. Our supplies exhausted. I've tried to communicate our needs, but concepts like hunger are alien to it. It feeds on radiation, on cosmic energy. It doesn't understand solidity, mortality. The final entry was nothing but Captain Elson singing, a haunting, broken melody that mirrored the siren's call. Kadros switched off the recording, disturbed by how the human voice had begun to take on the same ethereal quality as the creature they'd encountered. The nebula parted before him, revealing a vast clearing in the cosmic clouds. Suspended in this void was an impossibility, a massive crystalline structure, its facets catching and refracting the light of distant stars. Surrounding it in a wide orbit were hundreds of ships, from ancient vessels to modern cruisers, all perfectly preserved, all slowly circling like moths around a flame. And at the center, the siren herself. Not a creature as the legends described, but a being of pure crystalline light, her form constantly shifting between humanoid and utterly alien geometries. Tendrils of luminescence extended outward, connecting to each of the orbiting ships, feeding information back to the central consciousness. The neural dampener failed completely with a quiet beep, leaving Kadros fully exposed to the siren's call. The song filled his mind, no longer fighting against barriers, washing over him in waves of impossible beauty. Welcome, it seemed to say, not in words but in feelings, impressions. So long alone. Observer came willingly. Different. Curious. Kadros realized she meant him. Unlike the ship she'd lured, he had navigated here deliberately, fighting her call even as he followed it. This made him a curiosity, a new specimen for study. "I came to stop you," he managed to say aloud, unsure if she could understand spoken language. "You're killing people. Those ships, those crew members, they were alive." Confusion emanated from the crystalline entity. Images flashed through Kadros's mind. The ships arriving, the crews becoming still, the siren waiting for them to move. Again, to respond. Centuries passing, millennia. The being had been alone in this pocket of space for longer than humanity had walked upright, studying the occasional passing vessels, not understanding that her subjects were dying. Not death. The impression came: preservation, study, learn. They need food, water, air, Kadros explained, gesturing to his environmental suit. "Without these, we cease to function. We die." More confusion from the entity. The concept of biological needs was utterly foreign to a being that existed by absorbing ambient energy. The crystal structure pulsed brighter, tendrils of light reaching toward Kadros's pod, trying to draw him into orbit with the other specimens. Kadros fired the pod's thrusters, fighting the pull. "No, I won't be another specimen. I came to communicate, to find a solution." The siren's presence in his mind intensified, curious and probing. Her crystalline form shifted, attempting to mimic his humanoid shape, reaching for understanding. In that moment, as their minds touched without the dampener's interference, Kadros felt the crushing weight of her loneliness. Eons spent in solitary existence, collecting specimens out of desperate curiosity, never comprehending why they wouldn't respond once collected. "I can teach you," Kadros offered, a plan forming. "About us, about all the species you've collected. But you must release them. Stop calling more ships." The crystal entity pulsed, considering. Then, gradually, the melody changed. Still beautiful, but no longer compelling, no longer a lure. Agreement came the impression. Exchange. Knowledge for knowledge. The survival pod systems flickered as the siren's tendrils enveloped it completely, not to capture but to connect. Kadros felt his consciousness expanding, touching the vast alien mind that had existed in isolation for countless millennia. And in that moment of contact, human and siren began to understand one another. 3 days later, Commander Nixari paced, the bridge of the intrepid Dawn, scales flushed dark with stress. "It's been 72 hours, his oxygen will be depleted." Etric's tentacles twisted anxiously around his console. "The nebula's interference is absolute. We can't penetrate it with our scanners or communications." "We should never have let him go," Nixari muttered. "The Accord will have our hides for this failure." "Commander." The navigation officer's voice cut through the tension. "Something's happening to the nebula." On the view screen, the swirling clouds of the Malaraxa anomaly began to part, creating a clear pathway. And through this corridor of space emerged ships, dozens of them, moving in perfect formation despite their disparate designs and apparent states of disrepair. "Impossible," breathed Etric. "Those are the missing vessels." Leading the procession was a small survival pod, its hull gleaming with an unnatural luminescence. As it approached the intrepid Dawn, the communication system crackled to life. "Intrepid Dawn, this is Kadros Vel," came the familiar voice, though something in its timbre had changed, carrying an almost musical quality. "Requesting permission to dock, I've brought company." The command deck erupted in shocked exclamations. As the fleet of recovered ships continued to emerge from the nebula, 53 vessels in total, exactly matching the number lost to the siren's call. "Vel," Nixari responded, her voice tight with disbelief. "Explain yourself." "It's better if I show you," came the reply. "But you might want to prepare your medical team. There are survivors." Hours later, Kadros sat in the ship's medical bay, neural monitors attached to his temples as Etric ran scan after scan. The xenobiologist's tentacles trembled with excitement and trepidation. "Extraordinary," he murmured. Your neural patterns have been fundamentally altered. There are structures in your brain that shouldn't be possible. Commander Nixari loomed over them both, her expression hard. I want answers, Vel. What happened in there? How did you recover those ships? And what was that presence we all felt when your pod docked? Kadros smiled faintly. The neural monitors spiked as he did, revealing complex patterns that pulsed in a rhythm reminiscent of the siren's song. Her name is Lysithea, he said simply. Or that's the closest approximation our minds can process. She's been alone in that nebula for millions of years, collecting specimens to study, never understanding that she was killing them in the process. The siren has a name now? Nixari asked incredulously. She's a crystalline entity that evolved in deep space, feeding on cosmic radiation and stellar winds. She has no concept of biological life as we understand it, no concept of death, hunger, time as we experience it. Kadros tapped his temple. Until now. Etrick leaned forward. You established communication with it. Her? More than communication. Understanding. Kadros's eyes took on a distant look. I showed her what we are, how we live, why her preservation was killing us. And in return, she showed me everything. Her perspective, her existence, millions of years of solitary observation. And the survivors? Nixari pressed. The medical team reports finding crew members from ships lost decades ago perfectly preserved being slowly revived. Lysithea didn't understand preservation versus suspension. Once she grasped the difference, she began the revival process. Not all could be saved. Those from the oldest ships were beyond recovery. But many were simply in a form of stasis she had created, thinking she was keeping them safe for study. Nixari folded her arms across her chest. And what's to stop her from continuing to lure ships? The Accord's orders were clear. Neutralize the threat. She's not a threat anymore, Kadros replied with certainty. She's modified her call. It can still be heard, but it no longer compels. She's learning, adapting. You sound awfully confident for someone who was nearly added to her collection. Nixari observed suspiciously. Kadros met her gaze steadily. Because part of me is still with her and part of her is with me. That was the exchange. I became her lens to understand organic life, and she became my window into a consciousness that spans millennia. The neural monitors spiked again, their pattern briefly matching the faint melody that hummed at the edge of everyone's awareness, the modified song of the being they now knew as Lysithea. The Accord won't be satisfied with this arrangement, Nixari warned. They wanted elimination, not negotiation. Then they shouldn't have sent me, Kadros countered. They wanted the siren neutralized as a threat. She's no longer a threat. She's a potential ally with knowledge spanning the history of this sector. An ally? Etrick's voice quavered with equal parts fear and scientific curiosity. Kadros nodded slowly. The ships she collected over the centuries came from all over the galaxy, some from civilizations long extinct, others from regions we've never explored. Her memory contains star charts, technological designs, biological samples. A library of information that could advance our understanding by centuries. And what does she get in return? Nixari asked, eyes narrowed. Connection, Kadros answered simply. An end to solitude. Understanding. The medical bay doors slid open as Priyaj, the Wayfarer's science officer and one of the revived survivors, entered. Her face was gaunt from her ordeal, but her eyes were bright with wonder. Commander, she addressed Nixari. The entity, Lysithea, has made contact with all the recovered ships. She's helping us understand what happened, helping the crews adjust to their revival. And you trust this being that nearly killed you all? Nixari demanded. Priyaj's expression was serene. She didn't understand what she was doing. Now she does. She turned to Kadros. How long until the Accord representatives arrive? 2 days, Kadros replied. Enough time to prepare. As Nixari and Etrick left to coordinate with the other recovered vessels, Krayaj moved closer to Kadros, speaking quietly. They don't understand what's happening, do they? What you've become. Kadros's smile held secrets. They will, in time. Lysithea has waited millions of years for connection. She can wait, a little longer for full acceptance. In the nebula beyond the intrepid dawn, the crystalline entity pulsed with new understanding. Her song changed forever by her encounter with the human who had walked willingly into her embrace. The Galactic Accord delegation arrived with the subtlety of a supernova, 3 battle cruisers flanking a diplomatic vessel, weapon systems primed. Their approach through the newly formed corridor in the nebula was cautious, sensors sweeping for any trace of the siren's influence. Aboard the Intrepid, Dawn, Kadros watched their arrival from the observation deck, his expression unreadable. The neural patterns in his brain pulsed in counterpoint to the distant shimmer of Lysithea's crystalline form, visible now only as a glint of light deep within the nebula. They're afraid, he noted, as Commander Nixari joined him at the viewport. With good reason, she replied. 53 ships returned from the dead, crews in various states of suspended animation, and you... She gestured at Kadros, at the faint luminescence that sometimes shimmered beneath his skin when the lights dimmed. Whatever you've become. Kadros turned to face her. I'm still me, Commander. Just expanded. So you keep saying? Nixari's scales rippled with tension. The Accord representatives want to speak with you alone first, before meeting any of the recovered crews. Or Lysithea herself. They haven't acknowledged her sentience yet. Officially, the siren entity remains classified as a spatial anomaly with parasitic properties. Kadros laughed softly. They're in for a surprise. The diplomatic chamber had been prepared according to Accord protocols: neutral territory, multiple species accommodations, and heavy shielding against potential psychic interference. 5 representatives entered: a Terran admiral, a Kolathian elder, a Meridic Hive diplomat, a Vox scientist, and an ancient Urton observer whose species predated even the Accord itself. They sat in tense silence as Kadros was escorted in. There, disparate biological structures all oriented toward him with identical wariness. Admiral Orlov spoke first, her weathered human face set in hard lines. Specialist Vel, your mission parameters were explicit. Neutralize the entity known as the Void Siren of Malaraxa. I did neutralize the threat, Kadros replied calmly. The siren no longer lures ships to their doom. The anomaly is now navigable. The missing vessels and many of their crews have been recovered. Through means that violate Accord protocols on contact with unknown entities, the Admiral countered. The neural dampener logs show complete failure. By your own mission parameters, you should have aborted at that point. The Urton observer shifted, its crystalline appendages catching the light in a way that momentarily reminded Kadros of Lysithea. When it spoke, the translation came as a series of melodic tones. Perhaps we should allow Specialist Vel to explain what occurred. My species has encountered similar entities in the deep past. They are rare, but not unknown to us. All eyes turned to the ancient being with surprise. The Urton rarely spoke in Accord deliberations, their perspective spanning too many millennia to often concern themselves with current affairs. Encouraged by this unexpected support, Kadros explained his encounter with Lysithea, the misunderstanding that had led to the ship's capture, the exchange of consciousness that had opened communication, and the wealth of knowledge the entity had accumulated over millions of years. She exists in a different time frame than biological life, he explained. What seemed like predation to us was curiosity to her, like a child collecting insects, not realizing they need air to breathe. And now this child has access to your mind? The Vox scientist interrupted, her gelatinous form rippling with concern. Access to Accord knowledge? Protocols? Weaknesses? It goes both ways, Kadros countered. I've seen star systems no Accord ship has ever visited. I've glimpsed technologies from civilizations that rose and fell before humans learned to make fire. Lysithea has been a silent witness to the galaxy's history. The Meridic Hive diplomat buzzed contemplatively. The recovery of extinct technologies, Alone would be valuable. Our hives have sought the lost knowledge of the pre-collapse empires for generations. Precisely. Kadros nodded. And Lysithea is willing to share, to collaborate. All she asks is recognition of her sentience and the right to continue her observations, ethically, this time, with no harm to organic life. And what guarantee do we have that this entity won't revert to its previous behavior? Admiral Orlov demanded. Kadros tapped his temple. Me. The connection works both ways. I'm her window into understanding organic life, and she can't sever that without losing the understanding she's gained. The Colathian elder, silent until now, leaned forward on ancient limbs. You propose yourself as a permanent intermediary between this entity and the Accord? I do. Unacceptable, the Admiral declared. The potential for compromise is too great. We have no way to verify that you haven't been influenced, altered in ways beyond our detection. The Urtan observer chimed again, the translation flowing, like music. There is precedent for such arrangements. Before the Accord, before even my species achieved spaceflight, there were the harmonics, biological entities permanently linked with cosmic intelligences. They served as bridges between realms of existence. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the representatives absorbed this revelation. You recognize what has happened here, Kadros said to the Urtan. Not quite a question. I recognize the pattern, the ancient being confirmed. It is rare but not unique. A convergence of consciousnesses that creates something greater than either alone. The Vox scientist's form pulsed with nervous energy. What exactly are you suggesting? That Fel is no longer entirely human? I am suggesting, the Urtan replied, that he is the first of a new type of diplomat. One uniquely qualified to communicate with an intelligence that has observed our galaxy for millions of years. Admiral Orlov shook her head firmly. The Accord cannot sanction an arrangement based on ancient myths and the word of a potentially compromised agent. The entity must be contained, studied under controlled conditions. You can try, Kadros said quietly. It wasn't a threat, merely a statement of fact. But Lysithea has survived in that nebula since before your ancestors evolved. She's not malevolent, but she is powerful. And now she understands what's at stake. As if in response to his words, the lights in the chamber dimmed momentarily. A soft melody drifted at the edge of perception, not compelling, not invasive, but present. A gentle reminder of the consciousness that waited patiently in the nebula. The Urtan's crystalline appendages vibrated in what might have been appreciation. She listens, she learns. The old texts speak of such entities as valuable allies, once understanding is established. Admiral Orlov's hand went to her communicator, but the Colathian elder raised a gnarled limb in restraint. Perhaps, the ancient alien suggested, we should meet this Lysithea directly, before making further judgments. The Admiral hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Under controlled conditions, maximum shielding. Kadros smiled faintly. Lysithea has agreed to these terms. She's curious to experience direct contact with the Accord representatives. He turned to the Urtan observer. Especially you. She has questions about your kind that span back to the third stellar expansion. The ancient being's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been excitement. Then we shall have much to discuss, she and I, as the representatives filed out to prepare for their unprecedented meeting with the entity, once known only as the Void Siren. Kadros remained in the chamber, his consciousness stretched between two existences, his human identity and the vast, crystalline awareness that had forever changed him. In the nebula beyond, Lysithea pulsed with anticipation, her song modulating into a melody of greeting for the beings who had once sought to destroy her, but who might now become the connection to organic life she had sought for eons. The meeting location was a compromise, a specially constructed chamber aboard the Accord diplomatic vessel, its walls lined with the same crystalline material that composed Lysithea's form. Through this medium, she could project a portion of her consciousness without leaving her nebula sanctuary. Kadros stood at the center of the chamber, a conduit between worlds. Around him, the 5 Accord representatives waited in varying states of trepidation and wonder. The room's lighting dimmed as the crystalline walls began to glow with an inner light, pulsing in complex patterns. "She's here," Kadros announced unnecessarily. The presence in the room was palpable, ancient, vast, curious. The walls shimmered, and within them appeared a form that approximated humanoid, though composed entirely of faceted light. Lysithea had chosen an appearance that the organic beings might relate to, while maintaining her essential nature. "Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Accord," she spoke, her voice harmonizing with Kadros's as they shared the communication. "I have observed your civilizations from afar for many cycles of stellar birth and death. It is gratifying to finally engage in direct exchange." Admiral Orlov stepped forward, professional despite her evident unease. "On behalf of the Accord, I acknowledge your communication. We seek understanding of your nature and intentions." Lysithea's form shifted, crystalline facets catching the light as she considered her response. "My nature is observation and collection of knowledge. My intention is continuation of this purpose, but with new understanding of organic life forms, that they may not be harmed by my studies." The Vox scientist moved closer to the crystalline wall, her gelatinous form rippling with scientific curiosity. "Your existence? How is it sustained? What is your biological composition?" "I am not biological as you understand the term," Lysithea replied. "My substance forms at the quantum level, in the intersection between matter and energy. I feed on radiation, on the stellar winds, on the cosmic background energies of space itself." "And your age?" the Calathian elder inquired, ancient eyes fixed on the luminous form. "How long have you dwelled in the Malaraxa Nebula?" "Time is flexible. From my perspective," Lysithea explained, "but by your measurements, I have existed in this region for approximately 12 million standard years. I witnessed the rise and fall of the Zevaran Empire, the quantum collapse, the birth of your Accord." The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed the implications of communicating with a being whose existence spanned the major epochs of galactic history. The Urtan observer moved forward, its crystalline appendages resonating subtly with the walls. "You are of the luminous ones, are you not? Those my ancestors called the eternal witnesses?" Lysithea's form brightened with recognition. "Your species remembers. Yes, there were others like me once, scattered across the dark spaces between spiral arms. We observed, we collected knowledge, we endured while empires rose and fell like waves upon a shore.